Hello, everybody. It's Sunday, March 18th. This show may actually go out first thing tomorrow on the 19th. The news is bleak in many ways. The Financial Times reports that Israel has launched a ground operation in Israel. And the BBC is reporting that Israeli forces are besieging a Gaza hospital, not for the first, perhaps, or the last time. And of course, the images are particularly grisly. We've all seen them, stomach churning in terms of war. The real question is Israel smart to invade or re-invade Gaza? My guest today, an old friend, Marshall Poe, wrote a very prescient thing back in December of 2023 entitled, "History Shows Israel May Never Win a War of Occupation." So he may be warning the Israelis that what they're doing now in invading Gaza is incredibly unwise. Marshall is joining us. You're in Northampton, Massachusetts, Marshall, as always.
Northampton, Massachusetts, yes.
Alongside being the founder and the guy who runs the New Books Network, he's also a much published historian. He and I have known each other for many years. In fact, we both studied in Berkeley, he in history, me in political science, many years ago in the graduate school. Marshall, talk us through this argument that history shows Israel may never win a war of occupation.
Sure, I can do that pretty briefly. I might have to go on for a second. And obviously it involves a certain amount of history.
Well, our audience likes history, Marshall. Yeah, that's why you're always on.
It's important to understand that when the Israelis went into Gaza, they said they were essentially conducting counterinsurgency operations. They were going to find Hamas and they were going to kill Hamas, and then they were going to leave. They never said they were going to stay. In fact, I think they said they were going to leave. It's classic counterinsurgency. Find the bad guys, kill the bad guys, leave. And so this was December 2023, and I thought, well, what would happen if they stayed? And I kind of thought they might try to stay for various reasons. And I knew a little bit about this because I had just completed a book about the Vietnam War. It's really about the My Lai massacre, the military operation.
I thought you'd be, I'm not sure if you ever were on my show about this, but you and I have talked about it. The book that came out in October 2023 is called The Reality of the My Lai Massacre and the Myth of the Vietnam War.
Right. Well, that gets us right into it. And, you know, one of the myths that I'm busting is the notion of counterinsurgency itself. Because after World War II, the great powers or any power could not just openly say that they were going to occupy a country in a kind of colonial way. Colonialism was out. Well, what was in? Small wars were in, limited wars were in. And how do you conduct a limited war? Well, you identify the bad guys, and then you have these highly trained counterinsurgency guys go in and kill the bad guys, and then you leave. In point of fact, that never happens. So this is the kind of propaganda that the British used, the French used, the United States used. You know, for example, the British used it in Malaysia in the 1950s. The Americans used it in Vietnam. The French again in Vietnam and Algeria. The Soviets in Afghanistan. And then we did it twice, once in Iraq and once in Afghanistan. We go in, we say, we're conducting these counterinsurgency operations. They're really slick. We're going to go find the bad guys, kill them, and leave. But that's never what happens. What happens is they get in and they do actually look for the bad guys, but they've gone in such a ham-fisted way, or there's already a kind of pre-existing prejudice against them that from the point of view of the natives, so to say, these people are just invaders. You know, in the case of Vietnam,
they are invaders, and you note in your piece back from December of 2023 that 97% of Palestinians in Gaza believe that Israel is or was committing war crimes in Gaza. I'm guessing now that 97% is probably 100%.
Yeah. Well, and again, from the point of view of the natives, they are invaders. They're people that invaded your country. I mean, quite literally, that's the case. You don't care whether they're conducting a so-called war of counterinsurgency or not. They're in your country. And you're like, well, what are they doing in my country? And why did they just kill my uncle? I can't figure it out. And this alienates the local population if it's not already alienated. In the case of the Palestinians in Gaza, they had already been alienated. They already hated the Israelis. So really,
well, I mean, they have 100-year history. So
right, sure. And I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying they already were not favorably disposed to the Israelis. And the Israelis come in and they attack the place looking for Hamas. Absolutely understandable. And, you know, they end up killing a lot of civilians. This collateral damage is probably unavoidable. You know, let's understand that. But the point is that the entire population of Gaza basically becomes a hostile force. There are no more civilians. And this was true in Vietnam as well, at least in the area that I studied.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, in your book, The Reality of the My Lai Massacre, you sometimes see pieces in the Western media about anti-Hamas Palestinians. I'm guessing you saw a lot of that in the Western media on anti-Viet Cong Vietnamese, who probably for the most part didn't really exist.
Well, that's actually a very complicated question. They did exist in certain parts of the country. Vietnam is a pretty big place. It's about the size of California. Half of that is South, you know, so think of Southern California, that's South Vietnam. It's big. And there were sections of the Vietnamese population that were favorably disposed to the United States because essentially their livelihoods depended on the United States. But you get out to Quang Ngai province, which is kind of in the sticks, and they don't care for the Americans. And they see the Americans as just kind of the French warmed over. They don't like them. They want them to go away. They're not communists, but they want the Americans to go away. And so they're going to help any guerrillas that are operating in the area. And that's in fact what the soldiers in Quang Ngai province found when they got there. Is their task was to go and identify the Viet Cong and kill them. And what they found was they could not identify the Viet Cong. What they identified was an entire population that was pitched against them. And this is a particularly dangerous situation because, you know, from the soldiers' point of view, you know, they know it's not right to kill civilians, but, you know, what do you do with a case in which you can't tell whether a person's a civilian or not? Or you strongly suspect that they look civilian right now, but in 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 days, they won't be. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to protect yourself. And this is what happened in Quang Ngai province in Vietnam. The soldiers adapted.
I wonder if there's one difference, Marshall. Your book is about My Lai, which the massacre had an enormous impact on Western media in the US. But there's been so much bloodshed and so many horrible images now from Gaza. What would need to happen to create an equivalent in Gaza to My Lai?
You know, that's an interesting question, and it would probably be something like My Lai. And let me get to that for a second. You know, so how did My Lai happen? Well, I mean, one of the myths of the Vietnam War is that there were a lot of My Lais. There weren't. There was one. There was only one event of this sort. That
March, 16th of March, 1968.
Yeah. So far as we know, there was only one event of this sort, and this is, you know, roughly 100 American troops. They attack this village and they kill several hundred civilians face to face with rifles and grenades. You know, they conduct executions. There's no question about this. It's the only case that we have like this. So why did this happen? Well, it happened because they were really badly led. The commanders, the people in charge, Cowley and a guy named Barker, who you never hear about, had basically set up this operation to go wrong. And it did go wrong. They had bad intelligence. The intelligence said that My Lai was full of Viet Cong. It had no Viet Cong in it. So the soldiers get there. They're expecting to see the Viet Cong, and they just open fire because everybody had told them, this village is full of Viet Cong. You can kill everybody in there. And they were like, great. That's just what I want to hear. Well, this could happen in Gaza easily. So, you know, you have a block. And
hasn't it already happened? I mean,
well, you know, again, I think it probably has, but on a smaller scale. You know, you have a block somewhere in Gaza. Gaza, very densely populated. You know, 2 million people in an area that's, you know, 25 miles by 7 miles, and you have an area, and the IDF commanders are a little bit worried about it. They're not sure who's in there, and they get some intelligence that it's full of, it's full of Hamas people, right? The intelligence may not be good. Okay, so what do? Well, the conservative thing to do is do nothing. They can't do that because, they need force protection. They have to protect their own forces. And so essentially they attack the place. And then they learn later that it's full of civilians. Yes, this has happened before. But also the other thing to say is that, there's, even in the military, there's kind of a first string and a second string. And the IDF went in with its first string, a year and a half ago. These were guys who were very, very well trained, very, very well led. Those are not the guys in Gaza anymore. The guys in Gaza now and the guys that will be in the occupation force are like reservists. They're the second string. And these guys, they, as professional as they are, simply aren't capable of conducting operations in a context like that in a safe way.
I wonder whether you mentioned this second string of the IDF who are currently now in Gaza, whether they could go one of two ways, either a My Lai style massacre or simply putting their weapons down and refusing to fight.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that because at My Lai, that happened. A good third of the American troops who were ordered to fire on these civilians or so-called civilians, from their point of view, they weren't civilians, refused to do so. People don't know this about My Lai, but they just refused. They said, no, we're not doing this. Yeah, it certainly is the case that this has happened already in Gaza and will happen again when, some lieutenant says that building over there is full of Hamas and some sergeant says, no, actually it isn't. And the lieutenant says, I don't give a shit. Blow it up. And and some of the soldiers are going to go, nope, sorry, not doing that. Right. But, military justice, that's not good. You have to obey orders. So there'll be consequences. So obviously people are hesitant to do that. So the building gets blown up. Turns out that there's nothing but essentially Palestinians in it. No, they don't find an arms cache. They don't see anybody that they recognize. And what do they do at that point? Well, they cover it up. What choice do they have? Right? It can't exactly come clean. That's what happened at My Lai. They covered it up. Because things had gone south in a very, very horrible way. And they decided to save their careers. And you hardly blame them for that. But, in this case, they were kind of second stringers and they were very badly led, and this really mattered because, you want people doing these kinds of things, especially in a war of occupation, that really know what they're doing. But there aren't that many people that know what they're doing.
In your prescient piece, you link to a lot of literature on Vietnam and libraries of books written about it. One book, LBJ and Vietnam, A Different Kind of War. Of course, LBJ's political career was destroyed and his brand destroyed by Vietnam. Are there equivalents in your mind between LBJ and Netanyahu?
No, I can't. I can never believe that Netanyahu is still in power after what happened on October 7th. That happened on his watch. Is there no such thing as accountability anymore? Like, what the hell? I don't understand it.
But doesn't that point to the fact that things are different? Because had that been on LBJ's watch, he would have been out in 10 days.
Right. Well, he kind of was. I mean, it sunk his political career. But apparently things have changed in Israel and they're willing to countenance these things. And I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm just saying that seems to be what's happening. That they want Netanyahu to lead this kind of war of occupation where they go into Gaza, they take the place over, and they try to control it. Well, let me go on for just a second. The problem is you can't control it. The IDF sends in 10, 20, 30,000 guys. There are 2 million Palestinians there. There's just no way they can be everywhere at once. And so, they're going to start to protect themselves because they know that some percentage of the population is trying to kill them all the time. At every moment, there's a percentage of the population trying to kill them. And this is just what these guys in Quang Ngai province thought. Everybody they saw was trying to kill them. And so, of course, they were, a little bit like risk averse. They're like, I'm not going to take any chances here. And so they did things which, are kind of, you wouldn't think they would do it. Here's an example. In Vietnam, there were minefields. And so when they would come upon a minefield, these American troops, they would go get some villagers. And they would say, okay, you're going to walk in front of us. First, they'd ask them, is there a minefield there? And they'd go, no minefield. Well, and the Americans would say, well, let's find out. You're going to walk in front of us. Now, obviously, this is not good military practice. But they did it, but they did it to protect themselves, or at least what they thought. They thought they were protecting themselves. This is the kind of thing where you get this sort of slippage, this ethical slippage, and a lot of it is going on in Gaza right now. And so really the question is, once you have gone in under the cover of counterinsurgency, and in fact, are really just occupying the place, and you've alienated the entire population, and all of them are trying to kill your forces who are occupying the place, what do you do? Well, I mean, we know, like, your choices are pretty limited. We know, for example, what the Nazis did, right? Because they were in this situation. And the Nazis just rounded up entire villages and shot people. And here's the astounding thing. That didn't work. They never actually managed to completely reduce the resistance anywhere they were, which is, it's really like.
I wonder though if there's one difference, Marshall. It's that the Israelis are now thinking out loud, and some people within the Trump administration seem sympathetic about simply moving the entire population, acknowledging that all these Gazans are pro-Hamas. And that they're never going to win them over, and that they are essentially all enemies. So they're going to move them to Egypt or Jordan or
Let me get to that. So there are a number of strategies which you might do if you find yourself in this horrible situation where you're occupying a place that is incredibly hostile to you. You're trying to occupy it. You can't really occupy it because you can't control it, and your soldiers are in danger. But you need to do something. So what are you going to do? Well, you can't do what the Nazis did. That's out. In a world with human rights, you can't do that. You can't just annihilate people. But
the Israelis and I'm jumping in here, I know, Marshall, but some people listening and watching might say that the Israelis are.
Well, I don't know enough about the situation to say that is true, but I know that from the point of view of military ethics, killing civilians in reprisal for attacks on line troops is not on. That's no go. You can't do that. And the Nazis did it all the time. If a Nazi soldier got killed, they would take 10 guys from the village and just shoot them. The Israelis can't do that. And as I say, besides, it doesn't work because even the Nazis couldn't essentially pacify these areas in France and Poland, wherever. They couldn't do it. In the Soviet Union, they never did it. So even these extreme measures don't work. So what options do you have? Well, one is to cut off the arms supply. And this one looks kind of good. Right? I mean, Vietnam is a big country. It has an open border with Laos and Cambodia, and in the north with North Vietnam. That's a lot of border to cover. You cannot cover it. You cannot cut off the arms supply. And we never did, not even close. The arms just flowed freely into South Vietnam. So that strategy's out. So, you have to ask yourself, could the Israelis do it? Well, there's a wall around Gaza, so that's a good start. And they probably could be more effective than the Americans were. But how many arms caches are there hidden in Gaza? I would guess there are quite a few. And then there's that pesky southern border with Egypt, with all the tunnels under it. And then there's the open coastline, which the Israeli Navy claims it can take care of. It's only 25 miles. Okay, maybe.
And then there's the Lebanon border, of course.
Well, it's just going to be very hard to keep arms out of the place because what I would say is true, and I'd be interested to hear what an expert would say about this, is that there are already huge arms caches all over the place.
Well, you're the expert. I mean, I wouldn't have you on the show, Marshall, if you weren't, in a sense, an expert. You're a historian. So you're telling people that there are comparisons, analogies between
this one, we really tried. One of the things people don't realize about the Vietnam War is we body count. You've heard that, right? Right. Well, the American forces were also interested in what they called weapons counts. They wanted to see how many weapons we captured, because the idea was if we captured a lot of weapons, they won't have any guns and they can't fight. I'm sure the Israelis are doing exactly the same thing. They're counting bodies and they're counting weapons, and they're hoping that they get enough weapons that Hamas cannot fight anymore, or the population can't fight anymore. What I'm saying is that they will never get there, because there will always be more people that want to kill them, and there'll always be another arms cache that Hamas will have access to. Now, how it will happen, I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure it will happen, and they're going to find themselves in a very frustrating situation where things like My Lai happen, because the soldiers are frustrated.
Well, there was only, as you say, only one My Lai.
There was only one My Lai, that's right.
Fortunately, miraculously. I mean, your analysis, your comparison is an unusual one. A lot of people have compared the situation between the campus protests in '68 in the late '60s and the protests today. In your mind, as a historian, are they equivalent to? I mean, more and more talk about. There was a piece in I think it was in the New York Times about how Project 2025 is intent on shutting down pro-Gaza thinking and demonstrations on U.S. universities.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really qualified. I don't follow that closely, so I can't really say anything very interesting. But I can what I can say. Well, let me just go back to what do you do if you're in this terrible situation and you're Israeli? Because I wasn't quite done. You know, this is an analogy which isn't bad, which you'll recognize, the Troubles, right?
In Ireland,
right? 69 to 72, the British send in the British Army at the request of the Catholics to be protected. People forget this, and then all hell breaks loose. And the British never managed to get all the guns. They never managed to find all the IRA. You know, as the British Army, like it's a serious, they're serious people, and they can't do it. And so, you know, this is like, you know, this is Belfast and Londonderry on steroids because there are 2 million people here. So it's a much bigger, it's a much bigger and much more complex situation. So again, I'll go back to like cutting off the arms supply. Let's just say they can't do that. Well, and this goes back to something you said. What's their other option? They can isolate or relocate the population. And now they're openly talking about that, which I find pretty incredible. They're talking about removing the Palestinians from Gaza, 2 million of them. Well, okay, as a historian, I can tell you this. This has been done a number of times in the 20th century, right? We all know that. Like the Turks did it with the Greeks in 1923. That was a disaster. In the USSR, the Volga Germans, the Crimean Tatars, the Poles, they all got moved. Disaster. The Nazis did it with Jews and Poles. Disaster. Ethnic Germans, you know, after World War II, chased out of much of Eastern Europe. Disaster. North Koreans go south. Disaster. North Vietnamese go south. Disaster. I mean, just these large-scale population transfers. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you bring up the Greek-Turkish one. Those were exchanges. I mean, there's no exchange here. There are no.
No, there's no exchange here. Yeah, there's no exchange here.
So you could make the argument. I mean, for all the tragic catastrophe of the population transfers in 1923 in Greece and Turkey.
I think it was 23. I can't remember. I think.
I mean, when you go to a town now like which was Smyrna, Izmir, it's purely Turkish. It used to be Greek.
Right.
But
so anyway, every time a state who's found itself in this situation has said to itself, "Oh, what we have to do is just move all these people," it turns out that moving people is really hard if you want to do it in a kind of, I don't know, humanitarian way. And second of all, who's going to take them?
So some people might be listening to this. And, I mean, it's a catastrophe on every level. Tragic. More than, I mean, I don't know what a word we use to describe more than a tragedy. What's the alternative? I mean, by not invading,
again,
what did the Israeli army accomplish?
I mean, as a historian, I kind of believe in objectivity and neutrality, and so I am not taking any side here. I'm just saying this. I'm maintaining the is-ought distinction. I'm not talking about ought. I'm talking about is. This is what is happening. You can, however, say that the Israelis had very limited options, both politically and militarily. They really had limited options. There was not a lot of wiggle room there. And so, when they did anybody think they weren't going to attack the place? I've not met that person. And that's what Hamas wanted anyway. So it's understandable. Let's put it that way. They are doing things which I think from the Israeli point of view are completely logical. It's just that they have gone down. It's a little bit like a chess game. They've gone down a kind of decision tree that always ends badly. And so they have nothing but bad options. This is exactly where you don't want to be, right? So then you find yourself picking the least bad option, which is essentially, I think, what they're trying to do. But you're always going to have a bad option. There's no.
What do you? I mean, as a historian, Marshall, if all there is bad options, what do you do?
I mean, in the case of it, it's an interesting question. I mean, you have to decide whether you essentially want to act. Basically, you protect your people.
But
that's what most people would say.
I mean, if you want to compare Vietnam, I mean, eventually the Americans withdrew. They only had bad options, and the least bad was to get out, and they did, and they shamed themselves. But it didn't ultimately impact. The Israelis can't leave Gaza in the way in which the Americans left Vietnam.
No, they can't, because it's right next door. And I do think, I will say, and I'll say I should here, I do think it's probably a bad idea to occupy Gaza. It will not end well for them. It will cost a lot of Israeli lives. It will cost even more Palestinian lives. It will be very frustrating. It will probably lead to atrocities, and nothing will get rebuilt, and no firm, stable government will appear. It just doesn't seem to be the case that anything good can come out of that.
I'm not going to argue with you, but
I do understand the impulse to want to just completely eradicate Hamas, whatever that is.
Well, it means if 97, 98, 99% of the Palestinians in Gaza are Hamas, it means eliminating the Palestinians.
Well, yeah, see, this is you find yourself.
Let me ask you a broader historical question. You've written about a lot of different, your expertise originally was in Russia. You've written about My Lai. You've written about American history. Is there any equivalent in history to this catastrophe? Any insoluble question that has created so much controversy, so much tragedy?
It's funny.
I mean, you talk about Northern Ireland. I mean, maybe there are some equivalents, but to me, it's not comparable.
Yeah, there are long-standing ethnic conflicts. The Irish and the English, that's one of them. The Armenians and the Georgians, that's another. The Turks and the Greeks, that's another. And they wax and they wane. I don't know any analogy which is similar to this, really similar to this one. I mean, one of the things that I'm always amazed by, and I sometimes say this to friends, at any point in my life, I could get up and look at the front page of the New York Times and see Israelis and Palestinians fighting. Any point in my life. I'm 63. Like, you'd think they'd figured this out by now, right? They're not dumb people, but they haven't figured it out. And so you get something like this. Again, but to go back to something you said, and I don't think we should be shy about saying it, extermination is an option. I don't know what else to say. The Carthaginian solution, it's not like it's never been done.
Well, and there are people now on the right in Israeli politics who are speaking quite openly about that.
Right. I mean, and again, I mean, obviously that's abhorrent, but it is an option. And, it would be, I mean, the irony of it would be, oh my God. But yeah, I mean, the Israelis just have nothing but bad options.
So let's bring in, I know you got to run. Let's bring in the Americans now. Donald Trump is coming off, in his mind at least, a triumphant tour of the Gulf, which was certainly successful in some ways. Even the New York Times, not Donald Trump's greatest friend, acknowledged that there was a degree of adulation. One piece from the Times today suggests that there may be some daylight now between Trump and Netanyahu. I'm guessing that he's getting some of the conversations he's having in the Gulf is about Palestine. The Gulf states, of course, are in some ways financial backers, but they're no great friends of Hamas. Is this conceivable that any way out of this catastrophe can come from, of all people, Donald Trump?
No, I don't think so. No. I mean, people much smarter than Trump and with much greater resources have tried to crack this nut. And it is too complicated to be, you know, it's the Gordian knot. It is too complicated to be solved in any sensible way. I mean, things which I thought were just decided, like two-state solution. Like I grew up with that, didn't you? That's gone now.
Yeah, we all did. And
well,
it's
I just grew up with that.
Sometimes hear people talk about it, but they're not being honest because
right,
it's
they're
not
being nostalgic or something because it's over. Two-state solution is over. And so things have changed so much. And you know, like I mean, from Hamas's point of view, what Trump is doing with Saudi Arabia is a disaster. Because Hamas was hoping that attacking Israel would push the Israelis to do something horrible, and then the Saudis would come to their aid. Well, that didn't happen. And so this is very bad for Hamas. And you know, that a viable solution. You know, again, Trump's solution is essentially relocate the population or kill them all and put up hotels, which would probably be really nice because I know that coast.
Yeah, we
really
did a
nice.
show on the video, the Trump video from Gaza, which
and the fact that we're even like countenancing that, like it's a possibility, is really just incredible to me that we would get to that point. And I'm not saying who's at fault. I really am not. You know, people who have sort of a better perspective on these things than I do can go ahead and lay blame on all of this. I'm just saying this is the way it is. That people are openly talking about either relocating or, God forbid, killing those people. And that is a really remarkable turn of events. And Trump, you know, here's the thing though, you know, it's like, I don't know if you've ever run into this, like the Noam Chomsky view of the world, that everything that happens in the world is a result of what the United States does. That's just crazy. Like most of what's happening over there has nothing to do with us. There's nothing we can do about it. And it's a fantasy to think that we can. So it's, yeah. If only I kind of wish the Noam Chomsky view of the world were true, that we could go fix things, but it's not. Yeah, it has an autonomy. It's running on its own, and it doesn't need us.
But one thing we can say, Marshall, you can say as a historian, is that this narrative can't stay as it is. It must play out one way or the other.
No, well, it depends on what the Israelis are willing to suffer. If the Israelis are willing to occupy that place and just realize that they're going to lose several
but it's
thousand.
like Berlin after the Second World War. I mean, they can occupy. It's a war zone. It's not like occupying a place which has buildings and infrastructure.
Well, as I say, you know, they're going to try to occupy it and they're going to fail. And the result is there's going to be a constant low-level war going on there. And the Israelis are going to suffer casualties every day. The Palestinians are going to, you know, civilians are going to be killed every day. People are going to starve. You know, it just depends on what they're willing to suffer. Palestinians have kind of lost agency here in a way. I mean, they can fight, but it's really
to put it mildly. I mean,
the Israelis are really, you know, they're in control and they control the tempo of the thing.
I take your point on the Noam Chomsky view of the world. It was always absurd, and it's particularly absurd here. And that, I mean, everyone has some moral responsibility here, certainly the Americans. But is this? I mean, Vietnam was always seen as the stain on the American conscience in the 60s. Will later historians in the 2040s and 50s and 60s, will they look back at this and think, how could the Americans have allowed this to happen?
I don't see. Yeah, I guess this is a. I would, you know, people misuse the expression to beg a question. I think that you have begged the question. We didn't allow it to happen. It happened. It had nothing to do with us, and it would have happened whether we were there or not. And so our ability to do anything about it is pretty limited. Now, granted, we do fund the Israelis.
So I don't agree with you.
We also fund the Palestinians, for that matter. We fund the Palestinians.
You don't send
we fund
billions of
everybody.
dollars of military supplies to the
Right.
Palestinians or
Right.
Hamas.
Right. We fund both sides and we hope that they'll get along. But yeah, I mean, that's all true. We do that. But trust me, I don't know if you remember this. Maybe it goes back a few years and I kind of, it's vague. This is at the end of apartheid. Remember when the Israelis were really close to the South Africans? Do you remember this?
No.
People forget this. But the Israelis were basically hand in hand with the apartheid South Africans because the apartheid South Africans would give them whatever they wanted because they were under the gun, right? They were under sanctions. The Israelis, they were under sanctions by, basically half of the world, the socialist half. And so they make bedfellows with these racists. They don't care. They would get into bed with Kim Il Sung if they or Kim Jong Il or whichever one, the great leader, if that's what it took. So we're there, but there are other options, and I'm sure that the Israelis realize this as well as anybody else, that the Americans kind of fickle. Like sometimes they're with you and sometimes they aren't. The South Vietnamese found that out in spades, right? And you don't want to get too close to an American because an American might do what we did in Afghanistan, just leave, right? So you don't want to get in bed with the Americans too close because who knows? So the Israelis probably have lots of other options, and I don't know. I just know that it's reached a stage and people are talking about things that I find as a historian very surprising.
Not only surprising, shocking,
well,
stomach-wrenchingly shocking. Yeah. Marshall Poe, I wish we had more cheerful things to talk about, but unfortunately we don't. Next time, Marshall, we'll do a show about podcasting or Russian history, anything more cheerful than the current situation in Gaza.
All right.
You are a smart man and a prescient man, and your piece, history shows Israel may never win a war of occupation, should not only be read. I mean, it came out in December 2023. I hope some Israeli generals or even Netanyahu will have a look at it. But Marshall, as always, an honor and a pleasure. Keep well, and we will talk again in the note. And good luck with New Books Network, an excellent product.
Okay, thank you very much.